Hi there. We're absolutely melting here in Europe, but at least we've hit the halfway point of the year. We've celebrated summer solstice, and therefore it's the perfect time to round up some of my favorite reads so far this year. These will be new releases as well as classics and other books. So welcome aboard the International Express to Book Central. Grab a seat, settle in, and let's while away the journey with some book chat. I'm your host, Jules, and we're halfway through 2026, and I've read quite a number of good books so far. I've also read some books that weren't so great, but we don't need to focus on the negative, although that could be an entire episode in and of itself. If you're ever interested in that, let me know. Just something of a, complaining session. We can always do that. I wanted to also give a quick heads up. I'm about to enter, or have already entered, quite a busy time at work. So I'm doing my best to still record episodes, although I don't have quite as much time to put into them. But that too shall pass. So hopefully I'll just be back with something in 2 weeks. Then after that, it might get a little bit tight, but we'll see how it goes. I am also enjoying recording the episodes again. So maybe it will be a nice, active, productive procrastination. We'll see. So I've got about, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 10 books for you. Some of that is cheating because at least 2 of those are duologies. So about 12 maybe rather. But yeah, we're just going to go into them. I'm going to start at the top with the first good books that I've read. And of course there are other books that I've enjoyed, but these are really some of my favorites. So let's get into it. The first book I want to talk about is one that I read in early January, which is also when it came out, and that is One Aladdin, Two Lamps by Jeanette Winterson. And the interesting thing about this book is it's not a fiction book. Jeanette Winterson writes a lot of fiction, but this is sort of a mix between memoir that also tells stories, but also is about storytelling, and it's about Jeanette Winterson's own take on what stories have meant for her, what writing and reading have meant for her. So she takes 1001 Nights or Alf Layla wa Layla as her starting point and talks about how Scheherazade, or Shahrazad as she should maybe be called, saves her own life through storytelling, and not specifically through always an individual story, but about these stories that bleed into one another, right? So about the story that starts, but you don't finish it that evening, and every story is a continuation. And from there, sort of this magical way almost of using stories to save one's own life and to regain power in a situation where actually maybe you are initially powerless. Winterson then also talks about her own life, growing up working class, and of course being a queer woman. And it's really difficult to provide an actual kind of summary or blurb of the book because, again, it is memoir, it's a retelling of Alf Layla, it's social commentary. She talks a lot about class, about feminism, sort of our current, I think this is how I put it in my review of the book, our current hellscape, especially AI. Winterson is a bit more optimistic about AI than I am. I know while reading it, I was disagreeing with her, but I could see where Winterson was coming from. Sort of the ideas that AI could be a way of opening up new ways of narrating, of thinking about story, etc. And I don't see that. Because, well, regardless of what it's called, generative AI is not generative. It's not telling something new. It doesn't have a point of view. It doesn't have a lived experience. It's not embodied. I don't see it adding anything. But I could see where Winterson was coming from. So yeah, I found it really insightful. I found it really interesting. I loved reading about reading. I am one of those readers who enjoys a good meta book. I really like thinking about the process of reading. I'm currently in my own research. I am looking into cognitive narratology a lot, so how the brain works and how the brain works with storytelling, how we really approach the world through story, even if we're not, big readers or anything. We still have to make sense of the world, and we do that in part through storytelling patterns, right? So I find all of that really interesting. So I very much enjoyed One Aladdin, Two Lamps. Again, it is more on the memoir side, so if that's not entirely your jam, then this might be a bit more of a difficult read, but I would still wholeheartedly recommend it. Next, I want to give a quick shout out rather than a full discussion of a book, and that's Tradwife by Saratoga Schaefer. I read this back in February when it came out, and I loved Saratoga Schaefer's sort of first book, or the first one of hers that I read, which was Serial Killer Support Group. It was a delightful thriller, bloody, gory, with a nice sort of twist and a nice questionable protagonist. And so I was really excited to read Tradwife. I did have some quibbles with it, but I really liked how she took this idea of the Tradwife, set up a somewhat normal thriller story, and then took it into the paranormal when this Tradwife, who's sort of desperate to get pregnant so she can remain a good Tradwife, might have an encounter with something that is either angelic or an absolute cryptid or the devil. We are not entirely sure. And, and how sort of her life falls apart. It wasn't a full 5 stars, I think, for me. Although I really enjoyed it, I think if I were to match it to the fun I had with Serial Killer Support Group, for example, it wasn't quite there, but I really liked how Saratoga Schaefer sort of stretched their skills with this one. So I can recommend Tradwife to those of you who enjoy monster fiction, social commentary, thrillers, absolute bonkers stuff. The next book that I really enjoyed is How to Write a Love Story by Catherine Walsh. So as some of you may know, if you've listened to previous roundups, I enjoy a good Ali Hazelwood. And the truth is that all Ali Hazelwood books are good. And she was my introduction into romance. I owe that introduction to a good friend of mine who said, just read it. And yeah, I love Ali Hazelwood books. And I've tried to expand my romance reading because I want to figure out if I just really enjoy Ali Hazelwood's writing or if actually romance is a genre I can enjoy. I've come to realize how incredibly complex of a genre romance is. I think this probably deserves its own entire episode. Romance is, I think, incredibly difficult to write, much more than other genre fiction. With a thriller, if people are being dumb, if they're doing things that you would never do, if they're being irrational or whatsoever, that's fine, that's part of the fun. In romance, the slightest thing needs to happen, and that's an ick, and you're out. And then there's no joy in the rest of the book. So romance is difficult. Not all of it works for everyone. I've realized that I do like Catherine Walsh. And How to Write a Love Story is very cute. It's about an editor, Sam, who is sent to visit Sierra in Ireland, where she's meant to finish her father's epic fantasy series. She also is a writer, but she's quite reclusive, and there's a lot of pressure because her father is basically Tolkien, and everyone loves his work, and there's so much pressure on her finishing this series, right? And I just really, again, I really like books about books. So I liked the process of writing, how it was described, the conflict between our sort of main characters and this attraction that they start feeling for one another. It was all really good and it was cute and I thought it made sense. And yeah, I think it's just a fun one. So for a romance, 5 out of 5. Excellent fun. After that, my next fave of the year so far is Victorian Psycho by Virginia Feito. So I listened to this as an audiobook narrated by Anna Burnett, and I buddy read it with a friend because I'd sort of seen this floating around and I was intrigued and she was intrigued, and so we're like, let's do this together. And one of the main reasons I was intrigued is because I felt like it was going to be an interesting version maybe of The Turn of the Screw, right, by Henry James. That sort of classic weird nanny, what is happening in this estate kind of thing. And in a way it is, but in many other ways it's absolutely not. Victorian Psycho really stands on its own, and I had so much fun with it. Victorian Psycho is about Winifred Notty, and she arrives at Ensa House, and she's going to be the governess to 2, of course, annoying children, Drusilla, who's, well, sort of like a teenage age, and Andrew, who's still a bit younger, and he's the lord of the manor in waiting. So she's looking after these children, but it's very clear from the beginning that something is deeply wrong with Miss Naughty, okay? There is stuff in her backstory. There is stuff in her present. We are in her POV, so we get to see how she sees the world, and the way she sees the world is messed up. And we know almost from the beginning that something is going to happen at Christmas. We're leading up to Christmas morning, and Winifred is starting to lose sight or track of reality, in a sense. She's on a mission, but to what extent that is a mission she wants to do or feels forced to do, or just something that's taking her over. There's so much delightful gothic darkness and mess in this book. And it is bloody. It is gross here and there. There is absolutely on-page death, off-page death, description of horrifying things. But it's so good. I really just enjoyed it way more than I expected that I would. So I can wholeheartedly recommend this. My friend had a great time reading it, and I had a great time listening to it. So either of those are an option. I think Anna Burnett as the narrator, she really made me care for Winifred while allowing for that creepy, like, oh, she's not reliable whatsoever, but she knows she's not reliable. Does that again make her reliable? And she brought all of those kind of ambiguities and tensions into her voice. So Anna Burnett did a great job there. Exactly. So I listened to that one in March, and then my next read that I would like to recommend is from April, The Misheard World by Aliya Whiteley. So I'm a big Aliya Whiteley fan. I have been for over a decade now. I first read The Beauty of hers back in 2014, and then I was basically hooked, and almost everything I have to say, I've read from her since then has been great. The one thing I've struggled with is she co-wrote a novel with someone else, and although I love the concept, I can't seem to get through it. So I'm still battling with that one. And it's weird because I love Aliya Whiteley's writing, and I actually enjoy the writing of the other author as well. So I don't know why that's not working out. Anyway, The Misheard World, I saw that it was going to come out in March, and I was like, oh my god, yes. And then I got an advanced reading copy, and I was so excited. And The Misheard World is about Elise, and she's a soldier fighting in this big war between the North and the South. And the North and the South of her world, her country, it's a little bit unclear on purpose. They sort of had this unstable peace between them for ages, and then war broke out when she was young, and she enlisted for the South, and she wanted to get revenge because the city where she used to live was wiped out. And she's been struggling over the past years before the novel starts, though, with the question of what it's all about. And she's currently posted at the Crag, which is a fortress, a prison, and that is where she currently is. And she's starting to question to what extent revenge is possible and something she should even aim for. But then the performer spy Marius Mondegreen, known as the Misheard Word, is delivered to this prison because he's going to be interrogated by Alex Sild, who fights on the side of the South. And Elise had some childhood experiences with Marius, and she felt very betrayed by him when he decided to join the North rather than the South. Somehow she is chosen to be the sort of quiet third observer during this interrogation, and she gets drawn in to this, verbal duel between Marius and the Alex, and that's really only the start of what happens in this book. So The Misheard World is about war, it's about guilt, it's about open-ended stories that maybe we get to solve for ourselves or get to continue living. It's about whether revenge is possible and something we should aim for, and what it does with ourselves if we can entirely focus our beings on that. Again, I'm not an objective reader of Aliya Whiteley. I adore her writing, and so I immediately, within like 2-3 chapters, fell in love with this book. But what it shares in common with, for example, One Aladdin, Two Lambs, is this thinking about stories. Who is telling us what? And what does that imply about our world, about who's in control, about what we believe? But it does so in a beautiful sci-fi / fantasy setting. And it has this beautiful, it's not really meta thing at the end where we get to think about how this story could end and if there are different ways for it to end. And I loved what Aliya Whiteley did there. And so if you like sci-fi, if you like fantasy, if you like thinking about other worlds, about storytelling, then read The Misheard World by Aliya Whiteley. Now, after that, one of my favorite reads was The Count of Monte Cristo. I did an entire episode on that, so I'm not going to linger on that very long. But yeah, it's great. It's a big book. It's so much fun. The pace is good. It's immensely readable. Do get yourself an edition that has notes at the end, just so that if you see a reference that you don't fully get, you can either Google it or go to the back of the book and be like, okay, I see. I'm part of this. I get it. Yeah, it's really fun. And it's one of those classics that makes me understand why it's a classic once I read it. Just have fun with The Count of Monte Cristo. Although Aliya Whiteley's book might say that vengeance is not the way, or that we should at least think about it more critically, The Count of Monte Cristo is 10 toes down on vengeance. So maybe the last 5 pages bring in a little bit of nuance on that, but it's good fun, The Count of Monte Cristo. Okay, after that, we're going to get our first uniting 2 books into one situation, and that is the Shepherd King duology. This is also something I read together with that same friend. We read a lot of books together, and I'm immensely grateful for her. So the Shepherd King duology is made up of One Dark Window. I read this one in April, or actually I also listened to it. The Shepherd King duology is by Rachel Gillig, and the audiobooks are narrated by Lisa Cordileone, and she does a brilliant job. Because in the Shepherd King duology, especially in the first book, One Dark Window, we get to know Elspeth, and she happens to have a monster inside of her. In her world, there are 2 sort of forms of magic, and one of it is the magic that you are infected with if you get a fever as a child, and the other is the magic that is placed in cards. And these are the Providence cards. There's 12 of them, and Elspeth got the fever as a child, but it seemed that she survived it without gaining any magical powers, and that's good because that's the illegal kind of magic, and you will be executed or put in prison if you have it. But then her uncle, who she's living with, he finds one of these Providence cards, the Nightmare card, and being a curious child, Elspeth touches it. And ever since then, the nightmare has lived in her head. And this is why I love listening to this as an audiobook, because Lisa Cordileone does an excellent voice for the nightmare. I don't know, I'm always so impressed by audiobook narrators, or just, narrators, readers in public, when they manage to do these different voices and they're so distinctly recognizable. They really give such a good impression of a character. I had so much fun with it, right? So anyway, Elspeth has been hiding the fact she has the nightmare in her head, but of course, and he's so sassy. Anyway, she's hiding the fact she's got the nightmare in her head, but then she gets sort of drawn into this treasonous little plot that other characters have got going on, because they want to collect all 12 Providence cards so that then at solstice they can undo the Providence cards and thereby also hopefully cure the infection that people get after the fever and thereby prevent people from being killed. Maybe they also want to oust the king. There's a lot riding on this one plot, and she gets involved in it, and that is continued in the second book of the duology, Two Twisted Crowns. And it's excellent. And I'm so glad this didn't get dragged out for a third book. The way it's plotted, the way it works is excellent. We mostly get Elspeth's perspective entirely in One Dark Window. Then in Two Twisted Crowns, we get her perspective. We also get the perspective from 2 other characters, and that works really well because the plot sort of broadens a little bit. There's different kinds of quests and journeys in order to get it done. So yeah, I had great fun with this. One Dark Window, Two Twisted Crowns, The Shepherd King duology by Rachel Gillig. Another quick shout out rather than a full discussion to The Many by Sylvain Neuvel. This also came out in, I believe, April, and that's also when I read it. And it's a really fun, so Sylvain Neuvel writes great science fiction, and this one it starts with a tick, and this tick finds something alien, and then it finds a human. And if you know what ticks do, you won't be surprised. And somehow these humans that get in contact with one another after having been in contact with the tick, they almost start to mind meld. The question is this a bad thing, or is this actually how we save the world? By all being connected in one big brain. How do we remain ourselves while also being part of other people? And I just thought it was a beautifully thought out book. It had a really beautiful message. The message might feel a little trite, but I think it's worked out in a really good way. And I think it also addresses things like police violence, racism, sexuality, and how that would look in a world where we are connected to one another, right? So yeah, I wasn't entirely blown away by it, but I had a really good time with it. So The Many by Sylvain Neuvel. Okay, I spoke about The River Has Roots by Amal El-Mohtar before as well, so I'm not going to overly dwell on that one either, but I loved it so much. It's narrated beautifully. This is also one you should maybe really listen to rather than read. That's not usually what I'd recommend, but here it works so well because Carmella does a beautiful narration. Amal El-Mohtar and her sister Dunya El-Mohtar provide musical sort of performances, accompaniments with harp, flute, and there's singing throughout, and it's a beautiful experience. It's a novel about stories, about songs, about finding oneself, about sisterhood, about love, about the fairy world. And yeah, it's so much fun. Do yourself a favor. Slightly less fun, but amazing. I finally read Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This originally came out in 1993. And I only read it now, although I've been aware of it for such a long time. I just needed a couple of days off to really sit down with it because I wanted to really think about it. Parable of the Sower is about a time in the world in the 2020s. It was really fun seeing the years that I've been alive for kind of pass in this book. And she's like, now it's 2026 and this is happening. And I'm like, yeah, sort of. So it's about the early 2020s, global climate change, economic crises, all of this has hit America. We don't get a whole lot of insight into what happens outside of America, but it focuses on our main character, Lauren Olamina, who lives in California, and life is just very precarious. She is a teenager growing up in something of a gated community, and as long as they have the wall around them, they are somewhat safe and they're able to, have their houses, plant gardens, educate the children, etc. But it's all very on the edge, right? There's only one crisis needed to make this all fall apart. And Lauren suffers from hyperempathy, which means that she is sensitive to the emotions of others, specifically to others' pain. She does also feel their more positive emotions, but unfortunately, Lauren is growing up in a world where there's a lot of pain and misery, so she mainly gets that. Now, Lauren is the daughter of a preacher. She's grown up with religion, and throughout the book, she's thinking a lot about religion, about what the world and what humanity is for. And she's sort of formulating her own religion in a way, her own idea of what God is. And the title of this series, Earthseed, is a part of that. She considers herself and other human beings to be Earthseed, whose mission is finally to survive and perhaps reach the stars. As the world around her collapses, we see her gather people around her and try and maybe build something new, right? And I found it both incredibly difficult to read because, well, especially with this heat currently, but with the presence of war, climate change, deprivation, everything going on, it feels so recognizable. And Butler described it so well, considering she wrote this almost, 30, 40 years ago. But there's also such hope in it and such a belief in the goodness of humanity that I found it really inspiring. So I will definitely be reading the second book, Parable of the Talents, but I'm giving myself a tiny bit of a break so I can really let this one sink in. The next book is also a little cheat because it's I think a duology, although I can imagine, I've technically not finished the second one yet because I'm really stretching it out. It's currently a duology, I just don't know how it ends yet. So maybe there's a secret third book that might come. But what I'm talking about is Hench by Natalie, Zina, Walschots. I listened to this as an audiobook as well. I first listened to Hench, the first book in the series, back in 2023, written by Natalie, Zina, Walschots, narrated by Alex McKenna. It's about, this book is so good. It's about Anna. She works as a sort of part-time hench for the villains in her world. Her world has both supervillains and superheroes, and then of course it has sort of minor heroes and minor villains. And even they require data support. So she does a lot of data entry. She works through a temp agency, and she's working for the villains mostly, but she works from home. She's not really invested in all of it. And then at some point, a villain she decides to work for or gets a contract with, he invites her to a little field work. And before she knows it, she's in the middle of a battle between a villain and a hero, and she gets incredibly injured by the hero rather than the villain. And how she's treated afterwards, how the fact that people do not want to acknowledge that she was hurt by heroes, that heroes are damaging people, are costing them a lot of money, are killing people in some cases, all, to save humanity. She's like, this is a problem, actually. And she starts doing the math about how much heroes are costing society. And this is her journey into becoming properly one of the quote-unquote bad guys, right? She finds herself working for not just any villain, but the supervillain, Leviathan. And she gets to now try and ruin heroes' lives. And I'm going to sort of leave it there for Hench. The story is then continued in Villain, which came out this year, I think literally last month, and that I've still got about an hour to go in the audiobook. It's so much fun. So much fun. Anna is so deeply sarcastic, but also so vulnerable in moments. And I think Natalie Zina Walschots just does an excellent job at writing a book that is literally laugh out loud funny, that has weird body horror is what I want to call it, but just you have these supernatural superhero, supervillain bodies that are capable of doing things they shouldn't, and that has these gross side effects and aspects to it. And she really gets into that. Again, there is, body horror, there's explicit descriptions of injury, of recovery, of traumatic experiences in many ways. But yeah, I think it gets the blurb on Storygraph, which I looked at the other day. It sort of said that this is The Boys meets Assistant to the Villain. I don't know if that works because I haven't seen The Boys, and what I've heard of Assistant to the Villain, that sounds very cutesy, and Hench is not cutesy, and neither is Villain. But it does have that gruffness of what I've seen from The Boys, but there is also a lot of humor in it. If that is something you can handle, explicit sort of blood, gore, bone sticking out, all of that, and then a really dry joke that is somewhere between too far and just right, then you should do yourself a favor and read or listen to both Hench and Villain by Natalie Zina Walschots. Okay. With that, we're going to hit the last book, and this is one I literally just finished a week or so ago, and it's also just come out this month, Our Sister's Keeper by Jasmine Holmes. This book is a difficult one, but I think an important one. It's set in Mississippi in 1927 in the town of East Cobb, which sells itself as the perfect town for African American people, for Black people who are free. This is sort of post-slavery, the idea of here in East Cobb, Black people can finally properly live. And we get told about East Cobb through two different timelines. On the one hand, we have Thea Elliott, who's just moved to East Cobb with her husband. They're both teachers. But the town is a bit weird about her being a teacher because they're like, oh, but aren't you going to be the perfect housewife? And that's how we get our first inclinations that, well, for whom is East Cobb the perfect town? And the other story we get is about Mara, and she is a carrier And there are carriers in East Cobb, all women, who take on the emotional burdens, the traumatic memories, even the memories of physical pain that the Black men bring to East Cobb. And by taking those memories and by carrying them, the men can live free lives. They can be fully engaged. They no longer carry this trauma and this history with them. And that's how East Cobb feels so utopian. But it's built on the suffering of Black women. Now, I was amazed by Our Sister's Keeper, and I do also have to admit I struggled a little bit with figuring out how I felt about it as a white European woman. I know from reading that I've done how many burdens Black women, women of color carry in a way that I could not fully recognize, in the sense that, feminism is much more intersectional than it used to be. But there wasn't. I don't know why I wanted to qualify that with a necessarily. There wasn't space for the more differential experience of women of color in the early styles of feminism. The fact that for white women, gender is the main thing, but for Black women, Hispanic women, there also are levels of class and race that come into it. And Black femininity is defined in a very different way against white femininity. And it was for a very long time during slavery, of course, in America, but also now, tropes about, the angry Black woman, etc. These are still being employed nowadays. And I found Jasmine Holmes' book such a corrective, even to myself, where I'm aware of these things, but then reading about sort of the weight that these Black female characters have to carry, even in a society that is set up as a Black utopia, right? I found that really confronting. I found it difficult to think with and of, but also very important. So if you have the emotional fortitude, I would say, to read about racism, depictions of slavery, injury, violence against women, lynching, those kind of things, then you should absolutely read Our Sister's Keeper by Jasmine Holmes. If you think you have a difficulty with reading about those things, I think I might still recommend this book, because it's not meant to be easy, right? You're meant to be horrified by the violence that is being enacted upon Black bodies generally, but Black female bodies here as well, the emotional weight of all of that. And yeah, I found it, I'm still figuring out some of my own thoughts, as maybe you can hear, but for me it felt like a very important book. And yeah, I would just wholeheartedly recommend it. So, those were some of my favorite reads so far this year. I've got quite a couple of good ones still coming up for the second half. And, well, you'll hear about those as well. If there are any books that you've read that you think are amazing, I'm always here for a recommendation. So drop that in the comments. And that's it for today. If you have questions, thoughts on the book, or recommendations or requests for future episodes, feel free to leave a comment or send me an email at bookcentralpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. You can also subscribe to be informed when new episodes drop. You can find references to the materials used today in the description. Book Central is written and produced by me, and our music is by Scott Buckley. Thank you for joining me today on the International Express to Book Central.